All right, I'm going to go ahead and, can I turn off my video from here? Stop video. Okay, I'm gonna stop my video just to save some space and everything. And okay, so I'm here to talk about Fort Pulaski. We've been doing this project for about a year and we have another year on it. So it's very much ongoing. Would love to hear everyone's thoughts, etc. as we go in the chat. I'm not gonna look at the chat as I do this because that will just distract me. So this is Fort Pulaski National Monument. Happy birthday to the fort tomorrow. It is 98 years young as a national monument, that is, not the fort itself. It is made up, the national monument is made up of 2 islands. So we have Cockspur Island here and the Savannah River, which divides Georgia and South Carolina. If you can see my, can you see my mouse? It's here. So we're right there on the border. So we have Cockspur Island here where the fort actually is. And then we have this other island, which is mostly marsh and just wild space, and that is McQueen's Island. But that is also our access to get across the bridge into Cockspur Island properly. And Cockspur Island has a little bit of a different history than a lot of the Georgia Sea Islands. So most of the Georgia Sea Islands can be summed up as Native Americans for about 5,000 years, a couple hundred years of plantations, and then rich people come and build houses. And this is very different. So Cockspur has been mostly used for government and military. We don't have any known Native American sites on the island as well, surprisingly, but we do not. Could be there, we just don't know, but so far haven't found any. And so the fort, there's actually a couple forts before Fort Pulaski, and this will become a theme that you will recognize. Lots of the forts get blown away by hurricanes. So there's initially a fort in the 1860s, 1870s down on the southeast corner. And we're talking just little like earthwork readouts with a wooden blockhouse in the middle, pretty simple stuff. There's another one that is after the American Revolution that's probably here along the North Shore. That one is Fort Greene, named after Nathaniel Greene, who had a plantation on the other side of Savannah. The whole cotton gin thing, if you're familiar with that story. But this one was named after Fort Greene, and that one gets taken out. It's built 1795, gets taken out by the very severe 1804 hurricane, which was probably a Cat 3. About half the folks that were there at the time lost their lives. So not a rainbow over that one. Okay, so this is where we are. The Cockspur Island itself has really morphed over time. And I know this is, the lines are kind of small and you're all kind of staring at your computers. This is a little bit bigger as far as numbers go. But from the 1840s, the island is about half the size of what it is today. When they come in 1829, when they start to build the fort, and I am required to say, building the fort was Robert E. Lee, who would eventually become that general. It is his first assignment out of West Point. So we do have our Robert E. Lee story that we're required to tell. But he's there only for about a year or two, but he starts building the ditch and dike system, which dries up enough land so you can actually support a fort on this basically scrap of marsh. So if you're looking at this aerial photograph of today, you can see the fort here basically at the center. And then all of these lines that kind of look like farmers' fields are actually the ditch and dike system that is still present today. Somewhat functional still. We are actually working with the Army Corps of Engineers to make it more functional and make it part of not just historical interpretation, but actually make it part of the functional adaptation for climate change so that we can monitor, so we can work better with the water and incoming hurricanes and all that sort of thing. So it's the ditch and dike system that dries up enough of the land that allows them to even build a fort there. And over time, due to various factors such as the ditch and dike system, adding dirt, adding dredge spoil over time, the island has mostly expanded. There is one significant exception. So the red line is 1852. The orange line is 1863. 1854 was another very severe hurricane. And it does seem like the island contracted probably due to that 1854 hurricane. It probably took out at least part of the island. And then there's a big jump between the 1870s and then today, because every time they dredge the Savannah River, and this is because we have a very big port here, they pull up all the crap from the bottom and then throw it up on top. So you hear me talk a lot about dredge spoil. Sometimes I feel like half of my archaeology life is dealing with dredge spoil out there, but there's a lot of it. And a lot of the island is simply this dredge spoil that gets thrown up and then we get made land. So where my office is, so this whole half of the island is post 1900. My office is right about here. I'm the trailer on the right, and I look out on the Savannah River, and actually got to see them do dredge operations the other day, a couple weeks ago. So the main project, though, is we are not looking at the fort itself. We are looking at the workers' village. So this is where folks lived as they were building the fort. These were supposed to be temporary, as you see the map says. They ended up being used from 1829, built through the 1830s. Some of them were still around in 1881 when, yes, once again, you guessed it, everything gets taken out by a hurricane. Absolutely every last building on the island is completely removed except for the actual fort itself. So note too on this map that north is actually going to your right. It is not up as it is traditionally. So I know this is tiny print, but I want to point out a couple of important things here. So this is the Savannah River. We have the wharf here. We have laborers' quarters kind of here along the North Shore. These buildings were all very vulnerable, even to like king tides and pretty much any kind of weather whatsoever. There were paid white laborers. There were also enslaved laborers who were, quote, rented from some of the nearby rice plantations. Then we have this building, and then this building is officers' quarters. This is the officer's office. So yes, he had his own separate building for his office. And then this section here is where the mechanics live. So the mechanics are carpenters, masons, those type of, quote, skilled laborers. And then the round dots are, there's cisterns everywhere. Some of the smaller dots are privies and things like that. So this is the main section of the workers' quarters. And then the fort would be fairly close to the mechanics area here. And I just want to real briefly say, we're doing this project, not really to talk about hurricanes, although that's become sort of an interesting part of the project. Mostly we're doing this to tell other stories. So hence my hashtag Beyond the Battle. Fort Pulaski is famous for having a 30-hour siege. So the Confederates took the fort at the beginning of the Civil War. The Yankees come in, damn Yankees, they come in and they bring in this new rifled technology, and they manage to blast a hole in the side of Fort Pulaski, which was thought to be impossible based on its position at the entrance to the Savannah River out to the Atlantic. They thought that they were completely immune. However, with this new rifle technology, they could shoot significantly farther and actually managed to put a hole through the fort, and were about to get to the magazine on the other side, which is when the Confederates said, okay, don't blow us up entirely. And that's when they surrendered. And the big significance here is that with this battle, they managed to make every fort in the United States now obsolete. Whoops. So that's what Fort Pulaski is mostly known for. And we talk a lot about the Civil War there, but we're trying to sort of expand this into more things. So we have a lot of this, as we know, when people died and moved away. So a couple of things. We have lots of Irish immigrants that are laborers on the fort. That's what here, somebody died. Edward Carlin died of cholera. And we have 2 newspaper articles we know where African-American enslaved folks are running away. So there's another one too with Sawney, where we have examples of where they had run away and are basically hiding and chilling out in Savannah. So Fort Pulaski is also, I'm not going to remember the exact, of course, I'm not going to remember the exact designation, but it is a official MPS freedom stop, something about Underground Railroad. And that's sort of another really interesting part of the project I just want to mention, but not hurricanes. So I will move on. Okay, so I am the grateful recipient of some previous archaeology that enabled us to really hone in on where exactly we could find some of these buildings. In 2008, they had done some, they being SEAC, Southeastern Archaeological Center there in Tallahassee, had done some ground penetrating radar, some magnetometry, some shovel tests, and were able to basically do the phase 1 for me to come in and do the fun stuff, essentially. So here is the mechanics village. So the pink colored circles are some of the anomalies that got picked up. And and so we could really hone in on where we wanted to put some units because of that. And then this northern part here was not previously tested. So we went out and did some shovel tests, and then did another 1 by 1 there as well. All these units are 1 by 1 meters. So just kind of where we are digging in general. So we concentrated on the mechanics area, and then also tried to target one of the laborers' quarters as sort of our overall strategy. Okay, so this is zooming in then on the mechanics area. We have a lot of the areas had their own kitchen. So the laborers had their own kitchen, the mechanics had their own kitchen. Each of the officers had their own kitchen as well. So we have the kitchen here where you see, but more units dug. We have several mechanics, quote, quarters. And then we have this one building, it's a mechanics boarding house. And we still haven't found any distinction as to why they were called different things. What that meant for the services offered in each of these, we don't really know. But one interesting note about the mechanics boarding house, it is the only 2-story wood frame building on the island in the 1800s. And it was also called the Storm House, and it very much fulfilled its purpose in, I think it was the 1854 hurricane. The folks that were left on the island took shelter on the 2nd floor of that house, busted out all the weatherboarding on the bottom of the house, and allowed the water to flow through the lower level, and were able to survive by being on the 2nd floor of that building, because otherwise they would have been swept away. So it really did serve its purpose. Okay, so you can see the blue areas are kind of the 4 corners of our units where we got started. And I wanted to show you 2 of these profiles, because here we have the kitchen, and this is where we found all the goodies. And I have pictures of some of our goodies. But we have, our profiles are basically topsoil, obviously. The orange stuff is that dredge spoil that I talked about. So they're scooping off the bottom, basically sand, shells. It gets thrown up on the island. We find shark's teeth in it occasionally, so that's kind of fun too. And then below that, we have a really nice thick layer of solid 1800s era, full of all kinds of the kitchen trash that one would expect, where all the goodies are. The unit we dug over here in the mechanics boarding house is topsoil, dredge spoil, and then it's got this thin layer that has a few things in it that are 19th century, but just, I mean, not even hardly enough to really get an analysis out of. And then below that, the edge of the unit is kind of here, this modeled stuff above it. And then we just get this nasty slab of clay that seems to be the original ground surface of the island, because below that is sterile. So keep that in mind. Oh, and the other thing to talk about, so this is where we actually found a hearth. I'll get into this here. So this is the profile you were just looking at is down here at this end. And these are all cedar roots. We have a rather old cedar tree here that survived Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Irma, and an EF2 tornado within the span of a year of each other. So we sort of baby this tree a little bit because it's survived a lot, speaking of disasters. But we uncovered about 1/3 of the bottom of the kitchen hearth. Most of these are just 1 layer of bricks thick. So there's not a whole lot of it left, but on top of it was this relatively thick layer of all these 18th century goodies. And the dates, a lot of it's pearlware, it's dipped ware, it's this, later 1700s into the 1830s, into the 1840s, but we really have nothing that dates to, that's got like a TPQ of the 1860s or the 1870s. We've got 1 or 2 pieces of like yellowware that was, could be 1830s, could be 1870s. We've got a couple of pipes that give us a good TPQ around 1857. But, these buildings are supposed to be around for quite a bit longer, and we're just not finding the artifacts that say that this building was around during the Civil War. We have 1 military button, nice handful of buttons, only 1 military button that's an 1850 to 1860 general service button. So again, fits into that kind of pre-Civil War possibly. And then of course the obligatory, because we have it, here's our plan view map. So we started to really question, maybe this kitchen didn't survive the 1854 hurricane, or maybe it, you know, just wasn't around during the, maybe it wasn't around during the Civil War. So we have this great series of 1863 photographs. These, of course, are Union soldiers that you're seeing hanging out here. And we can see our two-story mechanics boarding house here. And you're just gonna, you know, sort of showing you a million pictures. You're gonna have to take my word on this. We've got this section here. Oops, too far. This section of the map is this section in the photograph, and we can see the boarding house, we can see the mechanics quarters. And when you zoom in, you cannot see a second chimney that indicates, you know, it's not perfect, but I cannot discern a second chimney that indicates that the kitchen is in existence in 1863. And then this other section, just to kind of orient you, the other section is up there along the North Shore. Now, these wooden buildings here on the demi-lune are kitchens. They're marked on several maps as kitchens. So they may have been a replacement kitchen along the way. Got to show you the goodies, of course. So lots of animal bone, lots of fun animal bone too. So of course we have cow. Of course we have pig. We all expect that. We also have white-tailed deer. We have rabbit. We have squirrel. We have some kind of bird that may be egret. And then we have turtle. We have eggshell. We did some flotation. We found even more eggshell. We have a couple of fish scales. We have a couple of fish otoliths. So we're getting a really cool picture of their diet and the fact that they're out there probably hunting as well. We have a couple of musket balls too that were fun. We have the usual assortment of bottles, you know, alcohol bottles, that sort of thing one would expect. And we have a little piece of a skeleton key that we found in the kitchen. So it seems like some of these supplies were also being locked up. Just kind of an overall view of some of the ceramics. Again, mostly what you'd expect: edgeware, dipped ware, some really nice patterns of transfer print that are 1830s, 1840s. That's like our nicest, most complete dipped ware bowl there. It's about half complete. This piece of edgeware, it's a big edgeware platter. This was actually really firmly jammed under the brick hearth, and only a little piece of the pointy bit there was sticking out. And I did what one should not supposed to do, and I dug under there and pulled it out because I think it shows that this kitchen was built, or at least that part of the hearth was built later. So one of the things we're going to do is unbackfill that hearth that I showed you and probably bisect it and dismantle it and get a better idea of its construction and its date and things, which just kills me to dismantle something like that. But I think it's going to be necessary to get some better ideas of what's going on in the kitchen area. So that's fun. This was fun too. This is, give everybody a second to look at it, but it is, all the iron is just corroded. We can't identify a nail to save our lives. The iron is absolutely terrible in this site, but it is a bone handle with the iron sandwiched in between the two pieces of bone handle. So that was kind of fun too. Lots of tobacco. There's a whole, I had 2 interns that worked with me on this for 6 months. And one of them did a study of all the tobacco pipes. Again, that's a whole other story I won't get into now. But he did a really awesome job of looking at some of the dates for them, but then also some of the social implications. And then we have 2 kind of mystery artifacts. If anybody has thoughts on these, please let me know. It's a copper sheet with little holes down the side, like it needs to be screwed into something. I've had some thoughts on it, but not terribly. And then we have this little piece. It is lead that seems to be covered in a thin sheet of copper or a copper alloy. Again, we have some thoughts, but I would really love if anybody's like, oh yeah, of course, duh, that's a blah, blah, blah. Please let me know. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on that one as well. So that's the kitchen area. Oh, there's another look at that. Okay, so that's the kitchen area and our lack of finds from the mechanics boarding house. So then our next area, I'm gonna kind of zoom in here onto the laborers' quarters. So kind of orient you, we're up here on the edge of the river near the wharf. So zooming into this number 3 laborers' quarters. And this was kind of a Hail Mary, honestly, between the changes that went with the CCC when they worked on the Fort Pulaski in the 1930s and into the 1940s. Down here at the base, there is Battery Hambright, which is circa 1900. It's a lot of disturbance because of that. I mean, just finding any piece of the laborers' quarters was, you know, kind of touch and go. So we did shovel tests, of course, and we had one or two that had like a brick fragment or something, but we had one that actually had some solid 1800 stuff. So we opened up a unit, lucky number 13. And so this is also, this is a similar picture here. And you can see this beacon is a good piece. These are the officers' quarters. This is where the building we're aiming for is supposed to be. Again, this is that 1863 photograph. You'll have to take my word for it. When you zoom in a lot, it just looks like there are tents there. We know that as the soldiers were coming and going, they were constantly putting up tents as temporary housing. They were also staying in the casemates when possible, but it's kind of looking like this building isn't there. We have another picture of a small building near this beacon. So this building is out here somewhere, but I don't think it is quite the laborers' quarters. I think there's another building that there's no windows, the chimney's different inside, outside. There's some differences here. So I don't think that this is our laborers' quarters still in existence in 1863, but that's our historical documentation of it. So as we began to dig down, and of course we start this on May, and it's the first hot week, and we encountered this nasty layer of really tightly packed dredge spoil. Then we encounter all of this rubble, and it was just not the most fun week we had on this project. But we encountered this rubble layer, which really seems to be the defining feature of this layer. It's several different types of rock. It is bricks and brickbats thrown in there as well. And then below that, so here's the full profile. So below this rubble layer, we have solid 1800s domestic type of artifacts, pretty similar to the types of stuff that we're finding at the kitchen. Less variety, but again, that same time frame of ceramics that date to the late 1700s into the 1830s and 40s. Same thing with the pipe stems, nothing solidly after 1850s, 1860s. So in that same time frame. And in the deepest levels, we get more animal bone and tobacco pipes that are concentrated. And then in this rubble layer, we get the architectural materials and the ceramics, which are concentrated, as well as just most of the artifacts are in this rubble layer. So it seems like we have sort of the occupation, things getting your daily throwing away of stuff, your animal bones and your meals and things. And then in this, either the building is coming down with this rubble, or the rubble was in place kind of sticking up from the ground. And then when the building was taken down, it sort of filled in the spaces between the rocks, if that makes sense. I'm thinking a lot about site formation processes here. So, and as you can see, it's very deep. We were down probably almost to 90 centimeters till the very, very base. And that is, we were lucky we hadn't had a lot of rain. It was we were basically like liquid pouring the dirt into the screen at that point. You can see a bone button that's in my hand here, and it's just muck at that point. It's very, and we didn't even really hit truly subsoil. You can see some shells and things here in the bottom, but we just kind of, for safety reasons, it was just getting so wet. It was going to start to fill with water. And so we just decided to sort of cut it off at that point instead of making it an even bigger mess and causing problems or collapse or whatever. The other question here is, so we definitely have some great occupational layers that date to the 1800s. Is this really the laborers' quarters? And if so, were there white laborers here? Were there enslaved laborers here? Which exactly building did we hit? Because there was also a building called the Boatman's House / Customs House. So there was folks who were employed to basically almost constantly be driving boats back and forth between Savannah, bringing supplies. bringing mail, bringing people back and forth, and they would have had occasion to stay on the island as well. We're also fairly close to the officer's office. From the maps, I'm thinking most likely we have the laborers' quarters, but there were some interesting artifacts here. So this we have identified as a cloak clasp, which I still have to say slowly, cloak clasp. So the back of it would have been, these two little loops would have been sewn on to one side of your garment. And then the other side, it would have, this is a hook that would have hooked on like a huge hook and eye basically, but a decorative one. And so you can see, we think it's a hand coming out of a sleeve. And when I turn this picture 90 degrees and put it kind of upright with the hook to the top, it kind of, at first glance, it kind of looks like the hand is giving you the middle finger. So I'm always careful to kind of put it sideways and you don't get that impression. So this was found in the very deepest feature there. And then we also found at the very bottom a slate pencil. And this is the only slate pencil we found. So given this decorative item, given a slate pencil, it seems less likely that we have enslaved people here, especially in the earlier, they could have used it at different points in time. But in these earliest layers, it seems less likely that this is being used as enslaved quarters. So I just talked about a lot of different things over this project, but this is kind of what I want to bring this around to. So we have this 1854 hurricane. For example, we know that the carpenter shop, which was along the North Shore in this 1854 hurricane, literally lifted off of its foundations and was washed away. Building, contents, everything. I mean, this was a very severe, probably a Cat 3 hurricane. We know that a lot of the buildings were damaged because of this. Some of them had just been repaired in the early 1850s and then they got re-damaged by the hurricane. So is it possible that this 1854 hurricane did so much damage to both the laborers' quarters and the mechanics' kitchen that we excavated that they were damaged beyond repair and that both of these buildings were demolished? That seems possible. It seems super coincidental that we just happened to pick two buildings that didn't survive later into the Civil War. I mean, that's kind of a coincidence I have a little bit of a hard time swallowing. But based on the artifacts, it seems like, and based on those photographs that I showed you, the buildings do not seem to be in those 1863 photographs. That the two buildings that we looked at most extensively are not there for the Civil War, that they had been raised as part of this 1854 hurricane. And possibly even, they didn't necessarily raise it right after the hurricane. It may have moldered for a while and gotten worse and then raised a little bit later because of this. This 1857 date comes from one of our tobacco pipes. There was some tobacco pipes that were only made between 1857 and 1863, really specific, very, very tight dates on those. So if these two buildings were demolished decades before the 1881 hurricane, is it possible that we are finding them and we are not finding anything else or anything else? So, we didn't find a whole lot from the mechanics boarding house is because they were ironically kind of already underground and already preserved, if you will, that those layers were preserved, but then the 1880s, 1870s stuff is washed away. And let me know if I'm not making sense here. But why are we seeing these differences between the kitchen having so many artifacts and the mechanics boarding house having nothing? Or there was also another project did some extensive shovel testing elsewhere throughout the workers' village and really found very little. So maybe we're digging in the wrong place. Maybe if we dug in a couple feet one way or the other, we would find some more artifacts in the mechanics boarding house. Another one of our hypotheses is that the laborers' quarters versus the mechanics' quarters are different because we're seeing class differences. So the mechanics had not only their quarters that they slept in, but they also had a two-room kitchen. So they had a room that the actual cooking was going on, and they had a dining room, which kind of would have functioned for communal meals, for hanging out, for socializing, for sitting and smoking and drinking afterwards, almost kind of like a tavern, if you will. Not that there was an official tavern on site, but it could have functioned as that. It would have been social space. And therefore, that's where all of this kitchen trash and lots of tobacco pipes got deposited. Whereas the laborer's kitchen was one room. It was just functional as a kitchen. And then their quarters also functioned with all of those same, this is where they slept, this is where they ate, this is where they socialized, this is where they had to do everything all jammed into one place. And that we're seeing class differences there. So that's another theory. And then we have my theory I'm not articulating very well, that because you had these layers that had been laid down, that had been then covered up, that the 1850s, 1860s layers remain preserved, whereas anything that's on the surface that's 1870s, 1880s is getting wiped away along with the standing buildings. So I'm still kind of turning all the gears here with thinking about how these site formation processes work. And one of the sources I've been looking at is some research by like geologists that was done after Hurricane Andrew, and how really severe hurricanes can affect the marsh, and can affect not just like erosion, but how it actually can take the marsh and like crumple it up like a rug on a slick floor. It's pretty wild. So I'm just starting to delve into all of those, like how hurricanes can really churn up the ground and move things and twist things. And it's kind of crazy. It's something I hadn't ever really thought about before this project. Okay, so then of course, because this is Nahar, I want to sort of bring this back around to today. So this is Fort Pulaski on an average, looks like wintertime. I just kind of took this stock photo of an aerial photo of the fort. So this is the fort, how it should look. And this is how the fort looked after Hurricane Matthew. This is WTOC is one of our local stations. So as you can see, and this is estimated to, this is probably not as bad as the 1881 hurricane. That would have put the 1881 and the 1893 hurricane, and probably the 1854 hurricane would have put probably about 5 feet of water into the parade ground there in the center. So this is bad, but this is not what the people experienced who were on the island in 1854 who survived in the second floor. In 1881, there were people in the fort, and they survived basically by climbing into the stairwells that take you up to the parapet, because there was like 5 and 6 feet of water throughout the parade grounds into the casemates. And so they survived, but it would have been a traumatic experience. And then I also wanted to give you guys just a quick look at what sea level rise is going to do to us. So this, again, this is the boundaries of the park and the surrounding area. This is Tybee Island, very popular beach area. And then this is the Savannah River coming through here. And then this is South Carolina on the other side. I only have Georgia data, so it's not that South Carolina isn't going to flood, but this is what it will look like in 30 years. And this is kind of a best case scenario. This is not one of the worst case scenarios. Quite a bit, including, so this is the fort right here. The fort is basically looks like it did during Hurricane Matthew every day. And this is part of the mainland, like where my office is some of the higher parts. And then this was one of the things that was surprising to me, is that another 50 years doesn't do that much more damage. But that the worst of it is going to happen in the next 30 years. So I started on the rainbow song, but sort of ending on a more depressing note.